Thank you.
You're here for just a few days?
Yeah, I'm here for 2 weeks in sort of annual vacation, and I'm in Chautauqua County for 4 or 5 days.
Perfect. A chance to golf. Are you a golfer?
Not really. I usually go once or twice a year with Dad and lose many golf balls on it and around. So.
Sounds like my golf career. Though I must add, I'm very proud of the fact that we played at a tournament on Friday, and my 1 or 2, and actually won the closest to the hole at Chautauqua on one of the holes. And
Oh, great.
yeah, I was thrilled. I just couldn't believe it. I said, man, when they called my name for anything more than just finishing last, I was thrilled. So anyways, what we did with your brother was an opportunity for a father-son conversation, maybe questions you never asked, or maybe questions that you want to do with the idea being that we're preserving history. This is oral history. Our subsequent goal to, now that we've done Mark and John, you today, would be to sit down, Stan and I, to sort of walk through his life and times and career, and that would be a private stock. I mean, this is something for the family to have your dad talk about his career.
Mm-hmm.
And who knows what, with that in basis, that may turn into a memoir at some point and at least trick the memory, but it's all kind of a gathering opportunity. So that's the backdrop of all this. And so other than that, we've got a lot of time, and have at it, John, if you questions you want to ask your dad.
Good. Yeah, basically I just wanted to do something a bit chronological, as I have nothing prepared, so at least go a bit chronological. You were born in '39 in Jamestown, right?
Yes, that's
Okay.
right. At the WCA hospital, as you were.
All right. Do you remember World War II?
Yes, I do. When I was a young kid, we played guns, and, everybody wanted to be the Allies, and nobody wanted to be the Germans. I was pretty young for that. My cousins were pretty active. But my big memory of World War II was the soldiers coming home on the train, into the train station in Jamestown. And even as a young kid, you could understand the phenomenal excitement. The high school band was there, and of course, everybody greeting their soldier members of their family and that kind of thing. I think that was after VE, Victory in Europe Day, but not yet VJ, Victory over Japan. Although I'm a little vague about that because I know we weren't supposed to celebrate greatly after VE because the war wasn't over. It was the message that the president and everybody wanted to give to America. But I do remember the war vaguely, and it was a huge part of living then. I spent summers with my grandma and grandfather up at Colburn's on Chautauqua Lake, and they had a victory garden because they wanted all the produced food to go to the troops. And so you tried to grow all that you could of your own, and they'd give me little things to do in the victory garden and that kind of thing. So there are these various little memories that have to do with the war.
Do you, after everybody came back, or was there a significant part of the population of Jamestown, or the sort of male population of Jamestown, out of town? And did they come back, or do you really remember that?
I don't really remember except for family. My Uncle Herb Nelson and Ray Nelson both were in the war. My father was not. He was involved with the defense industry and considered such a key person that they didn't draft him. And so he stayed here and worked at what was called Jamestown Steel Partitions. But my 2 uncles that came back from the war I remember very well. Herb came back on leave one time before he was discharged, And I remember going out sailing on the lake with him. That's one of my earliest memories.
Now, Grandpa played, your dad, the company he was working for had something to do with armament, specifically bombs.
Yes.
And were they somehow involved in the making of the Manhattan
Yes.
Project?
They basically made the casings
Wow.
for the bomb, and he was, for some reason, I am not just sure what, he was admitted to the place in New York City where they were doing research on what they called the Manhattan Project, which developed the bomb. And I guess because of he was doing the engineering on the casings, he had to go down there, but he had to be very tight-lipped about it, and I don't think ever told anybody until much later why he was down there and so on.
Did he have any, I mean, afterwards, obviously, it's one of those momentous periods or sort of instances in human times, I guess, that of dropping the first atomic bomb. Did he have any sort of feelings that he ever expressed one way or the other about being involved in the project, or he simply saw it as something he was doing, in his job?
Yeah, I think that's the latter is the case. I don't think he gave great thought to it one way or the other. It was an extremely patriotic time, and I remember when President Roosevelt died, to me as a little kid, it was like God died or something. I mean, I just, you just knew he was terribly important. And then President Truman, who was lightly regarded, I mean, I guess I didn't understand that at the time, but came along and made the decision to drop the bomb. And I think the best I can understand, most Americans, there was very little debate about it. I mean, most Americans said, get this war over. We need victory over Japan. We need it as soon as we can. And I think my father's attitude was, this is my job, and I'm going to do my job, and it's not my job to worry about whether or not this was the right policy decision.
And then, so anyhow, after World War II, you were in Jamestown permanently, or you guys lived somewhere else for a short period of
Yeah.
time in Pittsburgh?
No, in northeast Pennsylvania, just
Northeast
outside of Erie. I went to 5th and 6th grades in northeast. My dad had always wanted to own his own metal fabricating business and found an opportunity over there. But there was one working partner and one silent partner who I believe provided most of the money. And the silent partner turned out to be very difficult. So my dad bailed out of that after a couple of years, and we came back to Jamestown. Initially, as families did in those days, we moved in with my grandparents for a while until we found our own house, and I went to Fairmount School in Jamestown and then over to Northeast, and when I came back I went to actually I guess it was 6th grade. I guess it was only 5th grade I was in Northeast. 6th grade was at Charles Street School, where I was a patrol boy, and then went on, and we lived here continuously thereafter. I went to Lincoln Junior High School and Jamestown High School.
And when did you get involved? You got involved during high school in the debate team, or when did you get an interest in current events or in politics, or I mean, was there any sort of one instance, or just sort of through school civics classes?
Yeah, I even got interested in government and politics in junior high school. I had a teacher, as you often do, Mrs. Sleggs, who would encourage us to learn more about public speaking and more about contemporary issues. And then when I got to high school, we had a great debate coach, Robert C. Wilson. He was a debate coach at Jamestown High School for 30 years, I believe, and won several state championships and that kind of thing. It was a great experience. We traveled all over New York State, and I think some beyond, but we went to New York City several times. Our biggest debate opponents would all be huge Catholic schools, from New York City. The nearest would have been Canisius in Buffalo, and a couple of Catholic schools in Rochester. Although, interestingly enough, one little town in the Catskills, Jeffersonville, a tiny little place, always had a very competitive debate team because they had a great coach. And we contested with Jeffersonville as well as St. Regis and some of those great schools in New York City.
That had to be a great opportunity for you to go to New York City as a high school student.
Yeah, and Mr. Wilson let us do a great deal on our own and experience things and go to a Broadway show and so on. It was great. He trusted us, and we tried very hard not to abuse that trust. I think today, with all the concern about litigation and liability and everything, they would never allow kids to have the freedom that we had. But it was a very good experience, and I enjoyed it. And I think by the time I had graduated from high school, I pretty well knew that my hope was to become a lawyer.
Okay. And what did your parents or extended family think about this activity?
Oh, they were very supportive. I had a couple of cousins older than I was who went to college, so I wasn't the first one in the whole Lundine family to go to college, but it was fairly unusual in our family, and I never forget, in the 8th grade they asked, what are you going to do after high school? And, I'm going to go to college. It was just natural. And here my father never even graduated from high school, and mother graduated from high school but never went to college. It was just assumed that you would, and they were very supportive of education and these outside activities that I did.
Back to the debate team. Is there still a debate team?
No, I don't think there is. It continued for quite a few years after our era. A guy named Bob Carlson came along and took over the program and did it very well for a number of years, but it's just sort of lost. And I don't know even that there are debate leagues or state championship or anything like that anymore. There may be, but I'm not aware of it.
So you decided to go to Duke University to get, obviously, probably far away from home. How was that seen? Is that sort of a strange decision for your parents, or?
Well, it was sort of. That was partly my motivation. I thought that going to a different part of the country might be an interesting learning experience. And as far as I knew, no one from Jamestown had gone to Duke for 15 years. And so there wasn't, I remember I went to Colgate and looked at Colgate, and they said, well, when you come here, you've got to be in this fraternity because these guys from Jamestown are in this fraternity. And I didn't want that. I didn't want to be typified before I even got there. So the funny experience of going to Duke was that I then learned that they had students from all then 48 states, and I couldn't wait to find out who would my roommate be. And I get my roommate assignment, and it's the kid that sits next to me in homeroom at Jamestown High School, who had applied because he had heard me talking about it, asked for me for a roommate, and never told me until I got the assignment. I was a little disappointed that we were typified as the New Yorkers in our dorm. I don't remember whether there were other kids from New York State or not, but obviously everybody thinks of you as from New York City when you tell them you're from New York, but we're a long way from New York City.
That was Veer?
No, no, that was Sandy Love.
Okay.
And he only lasted 1 year. And then the next year, Vera Lindquist and Bruce Hagedorn, both from Jamestown, came to Duke. Ultimately, the three of us roomed together for 1 year. They were 1 year behind me, but we roomed together there for a year or so. And half of my career at Duke, I had a Jamestown roommate, although I didn't intend to when I went there.
It was interesting. And then at Duke, you were a history major, right?
Yes.
Was when I went to Duke, it was very sort of open in terms of, obviously there were core classes, but then you could really have a lot of elective courses. Was that similar when you went there, or was it more prescribed, your coursework?
It was a lot more prescribed when I went there. You needed 3 years of language, for example. I mean, you could qualify to get into the second or even, I think, third year right out of high school if you were proficient, like as you are in Spanish, for example. I was not, and that was the bane of my existence. I got through physics and math and other subjects that were different from my concentration just fine, but language was tough for me. And ultimately, I fulfilled the requirement by taking 1 year of German and 2 years of Latin. And it didn't help me much at all, but I got my degree.
You should have taken sign language or something, right?
Well, I'm sure, looking back on it, I should have done something different, but at the time it was more a matter of just getting through.
What were some of your good sort of in-class experiences and then out-of-class experiences at Duke?
Well,
that
the reason I majored in history was one great professor. His name was Holley, Holley, and he was constantly being voted the best teacher at Duke, and repeatedly, and I enjoyed. He was tough but challenging, but very, very good, and so I enjoyed economics. I had Juanita Krebs, who later became Secretary of Commerce in the Carter administration for Economics 101. And the only thing I remember out of the course is that she taught us the principle of propensity to consume. The idea is the more you get, the less you want the next unit. But she said, I'll teach it by its opposite, as martinis. The more you have, the more you want. and so she was a very, very able professor, and went on to be a very capable public servant. And in classroom experience was good. I achieved very well in the classes that I liked and had a hard time, just getting through those that I didn't. Out of class, I tried to make the golf team and didn't quite make it. I played my freshman year, but not after that. But I again got involved in debate. And while Duke didn't have a very subsidized debate program, we used to travel the country in our coach's Volkswagen bus. But while Notre Dame and some other schools would fly on planes and so on, it was a great experience. And I met Father Hesburgh, speaking of Notre Dame, the president of the University of Notre Dame, in his first year as president of Notre Dame, and also met the president of the University of Alabama. I think I won some contest in that debate a meet at Alabama, and we went to Miami at spring vacation, which was fun. And we qualified for the finals at West Point. Every year the college debate finals, then at least, were at West Point. And my partner and I qualified our senior year and did quite well. but it was such an experience. We ate with the cadets and experienced a little bit about life at West Point.
It's interesting. And then you went into law school, or you went immediately to law school at NYU?
Right.
You weren't particularly fatigued, or you sort of knew that was what you wanted to do?
It's interesting, John.
Burned out.
In your era, it's so much more intelligent. Both you and your brother, between undergraduate and graduate school, had work experience and so on. And I think it is great that people today don't feel as though they have to go right into their graduate school after undergraduate. But in my era, it seemed like that was expected. And so I did. I went the year after, the same year I graduated, entered NYU Law School. And what a difference in culture. I mean, Duke was academically challenging, but, relaxed atmosphere, and wear shorts and sandals. And NYU was sort of, you elbow your way to the top. They went at orientation, they said, look to your left, look to your right. One of the three of you isn't going to be here on graduation day.
And was that true, or was
Oh,
that...
yeah, very true. My section or class had 400 students, and I think maybe 230 graduated. And it was very competitive, very rigorous, a very different atmosphere. But I learned a lot. I didn't know much about New York City. And there were students at NYU from Brooklyn that had never been to Manhattan. I mean, in law school. And I'd say it was a 15-cent subway ride. I mean, why wouldn't you go see it? I don't know. I was just, all I knew was Brooklyn. And so, I mean, you learned a little bit about a different culture again. And, of course, back at Duke, I was somewhat involved with the early civil rights movement, picketing drugstores and stuff like that with black students from North Carolina College, but in NYU it was not an issue. I mean, we had a few blacks in our law school class, but it was no big deal.
And how did you feel after working or you did 3 years of law school in New York City, and then did you do 1 year at a law firm in New York City, or did you
No,
do
I just
internships?
interned at a law firm, big law firm in New York City, and they did make me an offer to come on board, and then they were absorbed by Sherman and Sterling, at the time the largest law firm in the world, I think. But I just decided that while it was very prestigious, and the pay was twice what it was when I came back to Jamestown, literally exactly 2 times as much as I could make back home, I just decided that you had so little contact with clients for such a period of time. And again, it was so competitive. I mean, a few of the associates would become partners and others would sort of be cast aside. I mean, usually they'd end up on their feet, probably with a corporation or something like that. But I just decided I wanted to come home, and I joined a single practitioner here. And as soon as I was admitted, I was fully practicing law.
And how was it coming home? I mean, you'd been gone for
By the way, just,
8
that was Al
years.
Ford?
Yes.
Okay.
You've been gone for 8 years or so, and had different experiences. Jamestown's obviously a nice place, but it's a small place. I mean, were there any problems for you sort of readjusting back here, or was it something that went really smoothly?
Carol, your mother, and I really would have preferred, I think, to go to a Buffalo or Rochester or sort of a medium-sized city, but I just didn't get real good opportunities, and so we decided to come here. Our rent of our apartment was $45 a month. So that was pretty attractive.
And you probably got ripped off because you were in New York City.
No, she was teaching school, started out at Panama because that was the place she could find a job. And we got involved with people in that rural place and a lot of the people that taught there and so on. And then she went on and taught at Jamestown Business College and then Jamestown Community College. Loved it at Jamestown Community College. I think we fit into the community pretty quickly, and it wasn't a really difficult transition because Al Ford, the lawyer that I joined, represented my dad's company. By that time, my dad had founded Dowcraft. Well, at the time I was finishing college, he started the new company, and we had some litigation that involved Dowcraft, and I assisted a Washington lawyer on that. And then I became associate corporation counsel for the city of Jamestown and really learned a great deal about local government. When I came home, I was mostly interested in national government, but quickly became interested in local government and got as a citizen member of the City Planning Commission, eventually became chairman of the City Planning Commission, and really deeply involved in community activities.
And that sort of sparked your initial interest in doing something local in terms of local public service?
Yeah. I got very frustrated because I thought we had good plans for the city, and the city needed new energy and excitement and wasn't getting much of it, and or implementing the plans very quickly. And so I was actually only 29 when I made the decision, but 30 when I got elected mayor. And it was a big decision. The mayor's job paid $10,500 a year at the time. I was making more than that as a part-time public defender, assistant public defender for the county. But because Carol was teaching, and at the first I thought I could practice law and be mayor, but it was such a demanding job that that was not possible. So.
And wouldn't there have been a lot of conflicts of interest?
There were some, and so I actually separated from our partnership, Ford and Lundine. We dissolved it because so that Al could not have those conflicts anymore. Not that he did a lot of representing the city or suing the city, but the city had such broad responsibilities. I mean, a community hospital, 600 employees at the hospital, a municipal electrical system, the only city-sponsored community college in New York State, and when I became mayor, a welfare system, social services that was city-sponsored, as well as an airport and bus system. And so there were all these responsibilities in addition to police and fire and streets and that kind of thing that no average city, small city would have.
So you were an assistant public defender for the county while you were practicing law with Al Ford?
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah, after I had a couple of public jobs, there was an interval in between, but first I was associate corporation counsel for the city, and then that ended, and after about a year, the public defender asked me if I'd come and be his assistant. And I hadn't done very much criminal law. I had a great wide experience. I did some estate work and, all sorts of different kinds of, I did some divorce cases because most of the lawyers then didn't want to do them. And so I'd take whatever came along. But when this offer came up, I was really, at that time, temporarily disillusioned with politics and that kind of thing after Senator Kennedy, Bob Kennedy, got killed, and Martin Luther King and everything, and I just buried myself in the criminal law for a year or so. And it was a great experience. I mean, I got to try a felony case, one of the first jury trials I did. So it was interesting, and I continued to practice the general practice of law as well, because it was part-time.
That's interesting. And who in your 20s were, I mean, what were sort of some of your either people or or events or whatever that sort of influenced your decision to run for mayor and to sort of jump into the pool, as it were, of public service? I mean, who were sort of your mentors around town or elsewhere?
Well, backing up, when I was in college, I walked across the campus one day, and there was a little sign up, the organization meeting of young Democrats. And I thought, well, I think I'll go see what's going on there. I knew I was a Democrat, and I wanted to find out about it. I figured whoever was calling the meeting would probably organize the group. And a dozen or so people showed up, and they happened to elect me the president of it. And it was a month or so after that, then Senator John F. Kennedy came to Duke and said, I want to be met at the airport by the president of the Young Democrats Club, not the president of the university. And I had the wonderful experience of spending almost a whole day with him, escorting him around, and I became just utterly fascinated. January or February of 1960, it became obvious why Senator Kennedy didn't want to be met by the president of the university, because his organizers came back and said, now you're going to head up the organizing. And they did this in colleges all across the country. He was a young candidate and inspired a lot of young people, and we had great experiences. And in fact, the University of North Carolina and NC State also had clubs and Young Democrats groups, and we had buses and went up to West Virginia, where a critical primary was, and went up there on weekends. So I really got bit by the political bug then. When I was in law school, I didn't have time to be too much involved. I got involved in one primary campaign in Greenwich Village a little bit, just helping out a little bit. Then I came home, and I thought it would be interesting, who could we get as Democrats to run for Congress? And I figured out real quickly that we didn't have a chance. No way was any Democrat going to have a chance to win in this district. So that, plus the experience of the Planning Commission and everything, and working with Mayor Dunn as his associate corporation counsel, I became interested. I don't know, and then I got to know Bobby Kennedy when he became senator, did a little advance work for him, which was very different because he was such a hero. His brother had been assassinated and everything, and so I didn't really have somebody locally who I would call a mentor. I had a lot of friends, and was able, when we first ran, to get some of my friends who were prominent in the community to run with us for city council.
What was your first campaign slogan?
The blue ribbon ticket. And
Blue ribbon.
because I was so young, and we were worried that especially older people wouldn't respect you as a candidate, we got Miles Lasser was head of the largest local accounting firm, and John Y. Carlson was a school principal, and Randall Chadwick, who was a manufacturing executive and others, to run with me. And so we presented ourselves as the blue ribbon ticket. And surprisingly, because the incumbent mayor had won by 2-1 2 years earlier, and all 12 city council seats were held by Republicans, surprisingly, I was able to win, and we won 8 out of the 12 city council seats. So I had a great city council. They were just terrific. They did not interfere in the management. They restricted themselves to the policies, and it was a wonderful experience.
Was there any event or reason that you can think of why people would make such a drastic change
Well,
over the 2 years that the previous mayor had been in office?
I still don't know how important the construction of the new city hall was in that. I think a lot of sort of conservative, not in the contemporary way, but the old-fashioned Swedish conservatives in this town thought that it was a ridiculous expenditure to build this grand new city hall. And whatever resentment there was reflected on Charlie Magnuson, the incumbent mayor, and I got to be the first mayor to move into the new city hall, so I was really lucky in that respect. And then I think after it was built, there was great city pride. Looking back on it, the thing I feel most regretful about is that we didn't seriously investigate saving the old city hall. We should have built a new one and had it for county offices as well as city, but if we could have preserved that old building, it had historic preservation advantages, and it would have been great. The library, the Prendergast Library here, is somewhat the same kind of stone that the old city hall was, but at the time it was a time of urban renewal and tear down the old and build glass towers, and I was certainly part of that. That's the only issue that I could point out that was a major factor. I think the community bought into the fact that we need new energy, and that it was pretty listless, not just that administration, but that it had been, and that our emphasis on economic development made sense.
What were some of on a day-to-day basis, what were some of the things that you really looked forward to in the job, and then other things that were difficult?
Well, the greatest thing that I think we did was to form the Jamestown Area Labor Management Committee. Our city had a reputation, deserved or undeserved, of being a bad labor climate. And we started this dialogue between the manufacturers and the labor unions, and it evolved into a committee that was very active in terms of changing the work culture within existing industries, saving businesses when they were threatened, and recruiting new industry. And our unemployment rate went from 10.2% in March of 1972 to 4.2% in March of 1975. So we made tremendous progress, including recruiting Cummins Engine to come into a 1 million square foot plant just outside of Jamestown. And that was exciting. I mean, it was tough because at the first, the manufacturing executives didn't even want to talk to the unions except at bargaining time, and vice versa. I don't mean it was one way. And getting them to dialogue, and then getting them to focus on mutual goals was really interesting and challenging. And we got people from Harvard and Wharton School and all over the United States interested in coming here and consulting and trying to develop the best kind of work systems, because there was so little going on of that type of thing. And so that was probably the most exciting. The worst, I don't know. I suppose, this is funny because ultimately I ended up in my post-government career in healthcare, but I suppose to some extent it was being responsible for the municipal hospital. There was such a rivalry between the WCA and the Jamestown General Hospital, and it was so evident to me that we didn't need two hospitals, that we ought to bring them together, and we tried. Murray Marsh, the head of the WCA hospital, and I tried very hard to arrange that and prove that we could save a lot of money and everything, but the resentments, well, on both sides, were such that we were unable to pull it off. What we did do, I think, is to begin to plan on a community-wide basis so that Jamestown General wouldn't duplicate what was being done at WCA, but we'd start new things. So it wasn't a terrible experience, but there were a lot of very difficult times there. And there were others, but that's one that stands out in my mind.
You mentioned a city either run or fully owned hospital, municipal electric system, airport. Are those still city-run
The electrical,
businesses, or have they sold them off
the
to
Board of
private?
Public Utilities, the electric and water system is still municipal, and we made the decision. We took a good look at whether to privatize it, and that was very controversial even to study it, but we did, and I think we made the right decision, and it is still a municipal electric system. We have our own contemporary issue that I won't go into now, but and actually the Board of Public Utilities has taken on other roles, garbage collection, for example, and so on. The community college is a great example of regionalism, which I've always advocated, and because Chautauqua County and Cattaraugus County have joined the city of Jamestown in the sponsorship of the community college. And there's a campus down in Olean as well as one in Jamestown, and sort of auxiliary up in the Dunkirk, Fredonia area. So that's evolved very, very nicely. The bus system has been taken over by the county. I got the county to take over the airport voluntarily, and the new terminal at the Chautauqua County Airport was built right after they took it over. The biggest controversy was the welfare system, which was killing us financially, and we convinced us. There were 4 in New York, 4 cities that had local welfare systems, not part of the county, and we got the state legislature to pass a law that consolidated them, and it helped us out financially.
And then in 75 or 76, you decided to run for Congress in the special election.
Yeah, in 74, my friend Bill Parment ran and lost 80,000 to 50,000, and I figured that we'll never have a Democrat from this district. And then before that term was up, in late 1975, the congressman, Jim Hastings, resigned to take a job in Albany, and so it was an open seat, and the election was called for March 2nd, 1976, and I decided to run right around the first of the year. Your brother Mark was born on January 5th, and I went around on January 6th announcing my candidacy.
That's so interesting that, I mean, these days, obviously, people are running for Congress seemingly for, and Senate for a year or more in advance, and in this case, it was relatively quick. What were your main considerations around making that decision?
Well, I knew that I didn't want to serve as mayor for more than one more 2-year term. not because I didn't like it, I loved it, but I just didn't want it to be a career. And this seemed like a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, running at a time when there wasn't a national or statewide election seemed to me instinctively to focus on the two candidates, which eventually turned out to be true. The difficult part was convincing anybody that you had a ghost of a chance in terms of raising money and all the things that go into a campaign, and obviously it was compressed so much that it was very, very difficult. But I went to New York City on a trip with the most prominent Republican in town. Reggie Lundine flew us down in his plane to meet with the Swedish consul in New York City to try to persuade him that the King of Sweden should visit Jamestown when he came to the United States in 1976. And I asked if I could be excused from the lunch that the consul put on for us, and I went over and convinced the guy named Russ Hemingway, who was head of an outfit that supported mostly Democrats, but both Democrats and Republicans that they thought were progressive, and that he became the first outside group that supported my campaign and helped me in many ways to convince people in Washington and elsewhere that we had a chance and that they should contribute. And so it was a fortuitous opportunity.
And what were the keys to you winning that first election?
Well, my opponent was in the Ford White House at the time and had been in Washington for 25 years. He had been head of the Republican Congressional Campaign Committee, so he certainly knew the inside and out of congressional campaigns. But he was originally from Elmira, and I think the carpetbagger issue was significant. Here I was, a local mayor who had contributed to my city and had a good record, and here he was, a Washington guy who was just coming back, and I think that was a significant issue. Now, this is right after the huge turnover in Congress in 1974, where the Democrats swept 80 new congressmen into office in the wake of the Watergate scandal, where President Nixon eventually resigned. And so the whole atmosphere in the country was helpful as well. I mean, I think there were a lot of predominantly Republican places like our congressional district that were thinking, well, maybe we ought to consider both. And certainly being a special election was a great advantage. I don't think I could have won. If it had been in the fall of 1976, even with the same opponent or any set of circumstances like that, short of a scandal or something like that, I don't think I would have had a chance. But we had tremendous participation in that special election, and just a real feeling of people coming together and advocating for change. And so I think it was partly the carpetbagger and partly just the whole feeling that we needed change.
That's interesting. So you were eventually elected to Congress and then came basically by yourself several months later or after the election or soon after the election?
Oh, yeah, very soon, within the week. On the 9th of May or March of 76, I went to Washington and was sworn in. Our whole family was down there, and I was sworn in to the Congress, and then came back that night and resigned as mayor to the city council meeting. I was so tired, and they said, "You gotta come across the street," and I didn't want to, and all my friends had gathered and gave me a rocking chair that I still have as a memento of my time as mayor.
Well, that's great. And then you were basically assigned to committees in Washington. I mean, was there any sort of learning period or any sort of organized period on which you were able to get settled in, or was it just hit the ground running without a lot of help?
It was definitely hit the ground running. The first time I went to vote, I asked the guy, "How do I vote?" He said, "I think it's an I vote for you." I said, "No. They gave me this card. How how do I insert it? I mean, I know which way I want to vote. I just don't know technically how." I mean, it was that kind of an experience. I mean, I was just thrown in. You know, for newly elected congressmen, I think there still is, but there was then a session up at Harvard for 3 days as orientation to new Congress. I had none of that. It was just got thrown in. As far as committee assignments, that's a funny story. I went down there during the campaign, and Carl Albert from Oklahoma was the speaker at the time, and he said, "Young man, you can go back and you can tell your people that you can be on any committee on which there's a vacancy other than Ways and Means and Appropriation." And I said, "Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker." I knew very well it didn't matter a tinker's dam up here. I mean, nobody would care about something like that. But I did remember it. So I got elected, and I went back and to the Speaker's assistant and he said I could be on any committee, and I want to know where there are vacancies. So there were 3, Public Works, Commerce, and Banking, that I was interested in, and I decided that I would just go and talk to the chairman of the committees. And I later found out that it was regarded that I was arrogant because I was interviewing committee chairmen, you know, about it. But I didn't look at it that way, and I chose to be on the Banking Committee, and it was a very good choice. I really enjoyed that. We had housing and economic stabilization and other areas. In fact, being on the Banking Committee and the Economic Stabilization Subcommittee led me to be a key negotiator in the Chrysler loan guarantee issue 4 years later. The thing I did not do immediately was get on a second committee. I had this theory that if I just spend all my time on one committee and learn about it, it would be better. And I didn't think seniority mattered at all. But if I'd have got on the Science and Technology Committee, which I did 2 years later or 3 years later, I would have built up seniority and been a subcommittee chairman sooner. And I got on that committee largely because the one thing that was really unique about our congressional district was the West Valley Nuclear Waste Facility, and we knew we had to do something, and the Science Committee was sort of the key to that.
When you were in Congress, I mean, was there any sort of way of pairing you with other congressmen, or who were influential other legislators for you in your early days in Congress?
Oh, you didn't really have any mentor system. Ned Pattison from Troy, New York, was a great friend, person of outstanding integrity, became something of a guide for me, and was very important. Tip O'Neill, who became the speaker for my first full term, was also very helpful. Even the first year, there had been a huge flood down in the Elmira Corning area 2 years before, and we needed a dam project built to protect those areas, and I didn't know how to go about getting money for a flood control project, and Tip was the majority leader and taught me the ropes of how to do that, and became very, very important. He was a great guy, and he had this great ability about knowing what your circumstance was. He came up to me one time on a really close vote when he needed my vote, or he needed every Democratic vote he could get to get something through, and he put his big arm around me and he says, "Stan, pretend like I'm really giving you the business. Pretend like I'm really leaning on you. Now, I don't expect you, I know your district, and I don't expect you to vote with us, but don't vote till the end, okay?" And I knew very well what the drill was. I could vote no as long as he had the votes to pass the
Right,
bill.
yeah.
But he was great that way. And John Bradamus from Indiana was the whip of the House, and he also came from a predominantly Republican district, and he was greatly helpful in the early years. John went on to become president of New York University for many years and was a friend, and I would regularly meet with him when I became lieutenant governor, as NYU was a very important constituency.
Did you have a lot of exposure to the senators in New York at the time, or was it
the
very
New
much?
York senators you
Right.
did, yeah. Originally, Jim Buckley, who was sort of a offbeat, he was a conservative who was elected in 1970 and not reelected in 76, was in. But Jacob Javits, we all call him Jack Javits, was a Republican senator, but he had taken a great interest in the Jamestown Labor Management Committee, and I had worked with him before I ever went to the Congress, and we worked together really closely. He helped me on the West Valley legislation that we got passed in 1980, and then Moynihan, Daniel Patrick Moynihan, came in 76. He was certainly, I knew him well and everything. He wasn't as attentive to local issues. Al D'Amato then succeeded Javits, and he and I never got along personally, but boy, we worked together. He really paid attention to the local issues, and we would compete with one another for who got to announce something that was happening in Hornell, but we worked together to get it done.
Do you think that obviously one thing that's reflected in news media now and over the last, say, 5 years or so is sort of the bipartisan or sort of the partisanship of Congress and the sort of inability of the parties to work together. Do you think that's something that's just sort of overplayed in the news media, or was it really different when you were there 30 years ago?
It was phenomenally different when I was there. A Republican could get an amendment passed to a bill. I mean, yes, the Democrats would decide what bills were coming up on the House floor, but a Republican could get his amendment considered and passed. Sometimes there was major legislation in the Science Committee, a bill called the Stevenson-Weidler bill. Stevenson was a Democratic senator from Illinois, and Weidler, a Republican congressman from Long Island, that passed a major scientific bill. And so it was much more civil. It was much less partisan, and it's, to me, really sad what's happened in the Congress. And to some extent, I think it reflects what's happened in the country. But it was a very different situation then.
Did you, in terms of legislatively, what were some of the things that were real highlights for you in those 10, 11 years in Congress?
Well, the Labor Management Cooperation Act in 1978 provided for help for similar efforts to the Jamestown one around the country. The West Valley Demonstration Project certainly was one of the most important nuclear waste bills ever passed, and got me interested and involved in the whole issue of nuclear waste management. Several bills on employee ownership And there I partnered with Senator Russell Long from Louisiana, who was chairman of the Senate Finance Committee, and he'd say, young man, I agree with you about employee ownership. You come up with ideas and I'll get them passed. And he would. I'd come up with ideas of incentives for employee buyouts and employee ownership, and he was a genius at getting things passed. Bill Bradley, senator from New Jersey, was also very helpful in that, but certainly Long was the key, and I think many bills on labor management cooperation I take great pride in. And finally, as I mentioned before, I really was one of the conferees and one of the real negotiators in the Chrysler loan guarantee business, which turned out to be a great success for the federal government, but unfortunately I did not get what I wanted, which was employee ownership of part of Chrysler.
What were some of your disappointments? I mean, things that you wanted to move legislatively that you just couldn't, or maybe even broader than that, sort of how sort of general things that you wish that the Congress would have addressed over that period that weren't effectively addressed?
Well, I think that it was a great disappointment to me that we didn't face up to some of the really key international issues. Nuclear proliferation, for example. Not that I was a leader in that area, although before, in my last term in the House, I became chairman of the International Development Subcommittee on the Banking Committee. That was mostly to do the kind of work that you do, to promote assistance through the regional and World Bank for developing countries. But I think that the failure to face up to some of the biggest issues was a disappointment. Of course, President Reagan came in and had his own agenda, and it was an odd situation, a very conservative Republican president and an overwhelming Democratic majority in the House, not necessarily in the Senate. But I think that Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan worked together pretty well, and we worked through it. I voted